I'd like to call to order here tonight's regular planning board meeting for March 19th, 2024. I believe we have a quorum present. Can I get a roll call, please?
Ray Taylor.
Daniel Ferris. I'd like to go ahead and move forward with tonight's agenda. I'd like to go ahead and skip down to item C, minutes for correction and approval from our February 20th, 2024 planning board meeting. Does anybody have any notes for corrections?
Can we approve the agenda?
Oh, I apologize.
Yep.
I'd like to get a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. I apologize. Going back to item C, any notes for correction? Can I go in and get a motion, please, for item C on the approval of February 20th, 2024?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from February 20th, 2024.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much. Jumping down to general public comments, there is no one that has signed up tonight, and no one present currently in attendance. So I'd like to go ahead and go down to old business, item E, for a conservation subdivision recap.
Thank you, Chair. So we had Randall Arndt. He wrote the book on conservation by design. Do a presentation. It was over Zoom. We invited the Planning Board, Board of Commissioners, some developers, landscape architects, and other municipalities. I thought we had a good attendance. I'm going to send out the link to you all. We have started drafting the language. The idea is to have an R1 residential, R2, R3, and R4 by right, and then a conservation R1, R2, R3, and R4 that would go along with it. Most likely conditional. It's based off of a yield plan, so if you can get 80 lots on 100 acres after you take out the roads and the open space, that's the yield you're working with to do the conservation plan. So then you can do smaller lots but have 50% open space. He went into detail on how to design better around open space, basically giving us, we have to make what our priorities are and what we want conserved. He said up north they're running out of farmland, so instead of the trees they actually wanted to conserve farmland, so they made that their primary conservation area to save first, and then made tiers like that. So we also want an open space plan. We have one with our comprehensive plan, but we want to take that and expand on it for any wildlife corridors. So then when a plan does come in, we know that that's the area we want to protect to be able to connect greenways. He also gave design recommendations, garages, having a 15-foot offset from the front of the house and the garage for better design, called Terminal Vista. So when you're going around, there's not a bunch of houses and driveways. You're looking at greenery around some of the bends. So a bunch of design options that you guys would get a look at as you're reviewing subdivision plans, more tools in the toolbox. So one, I'm going to send the link and ask you guys to watch that. We do plan on bringing that text. It'll probably be May. We have a big agenda for April, so we'll probably have that ready for May. And we'll be looking for a recommendation. Did you, Chairman Ferris, you were there, did you have any comments or any ideas that you liked or wanted to comment on?
Yes, I did. I know that getting into some of the architectural design, I know we're not permitted to kind of go by state law too deep into how a building is structured architecturally. But I know we talked briefly, and he mentioned that percentage, a percentage for the garage to either be set back away from. So I know, like in his display, like you mentioned, like 15-foot setbacks for garages, or garages actually the garage doors don't face to the street. And so finding a pathway to having an increased setback would be, I think, optimal in this conservation subdivision. It gives more of that tight-knit community cottage feel. The other item that I noticed that was brought up was how to protect, once the conservation subdivision is in place, to shield any further review of additional or future, essentially, building on that essentially land meant to be set aside. So if we had 150 acres and they were supposed to conserve a portion of it, let's say a 34-acre farm or pasture land that was essentially used as a farm, how do we make sure and lock in or create essentially multiple layers to make sure that that is preserved as intended?
In perpetuity.
In perpetuity, thank you, yes.
And he had some ideas on that, like conservation easements and.
A conservation easement, I know once it's platted, it's a lot harder, essentially, but it's not foolproof. So how do we have essentially an additional barrier? One of my thoughts was that I was hoping that we could explore as we go down this path is of locking in those conservation subdivisions into some form of 501c3 held by the town, and then maybe essentially adding in, not only do you have the conservation subdivision plat, the agreement with the established community, and then that land is then locked into essentially, or defaults if that community ever defaulted for some reason, a 501c3 by the town that holds that first right of refusal, and we adopt it, or something along those lines, in my opinion, and to where it now you have to go through a planning review, the staff, and a 501c3 before you can even think about touching conserved land and and changing its intended use. If you don't mind, one of the things that I understand from that is, so take your construction cost, and now you've taken that, instead of having it spread out on these lot distances, and you have and now take it to where you have it clustered even more into reducing roadways and utility infrastructure necessities. So essentially, the foundational pieces aren't needed as much to make, and so you don't have as great an impact, and you don't have to disturb as much land, from my understanding.
Right, so it's density neutral. So if it's zoned R3, and let's say you can get 3 units to the acre, on your new plan you're going to still be able to get that same density, but we're going to get rid of some dimensional requirements for them to be able to cluster and provide more open space.
Yes, and so
They're saving on utility runs, saves us on road costs and road maintenance 20 years down in the future. So it's good for town maintenance, sewer runs, all utilities, as long as it's density neutral.
I do know one of the things that I was pondering with that, though, is those roads would essentially be outside of our normal road infrastructure standards. So the only thing that I was thinking about, though, is with some of those, and I think we touched on it just a little bit with Cottage Park, where there were certain roads that were not conducive for the town to adopt, those private drives that led into back alleys. So making sure that when we plan, that we are more thorough, that we are adopting essentially arteries, not back alleys or drives, essentially that lead into those clusters.
Right.
And
So we would maintain that public road, and then all the alleys would be privately maintained. As long as emergency services vehicles can get through there, I think we can, since it's private, bend the rules to not have so much pavement.
Yeah, to not have so much pavement, we can massage those because it's private. We can just make sure that they're EMS appropriate, but yet essentially the individual residents would be required to maintain those lands and those drives
Or the HOA.
for the HOA, and that we would be more in charge of reducing essentially our cost inputs for those conserved communities.
So the biggest concern is getting the developers to go through that conditional zoning process. So we've even talked about making the it's such a good thing, making the conservation subdivision the by right option, or
Yeah. So
the
it
by
would
right
be-
option in the yield plan where you're grading everything and
so you're
it's conditional.
yes, you're essentially you're going to incentivize the conservation side, and then this traditional the traditional lot design and lot platting would be essentially a little more restrictive, and essentially required additional consideration and conditional purview for the planning staff and planning board.
Do they give examples of the conservation subdivisions?
They did some great sketch plats on some examples from other communities.
Would that be in the presentation? Okay. all right.
Yeah, and
Thank you.
there is a local conservation subdivision that Lisa has worked on in the past.
Yeah, what's it called in Weddington?
So there's one in Weddington, and I think there's a couple of other in North Carolina also.
Stratford Hall.
Okay.
Yep. And I can get the address and show the Google photos of that one. Weddington has had the conservation subdivision model ordinance for probably 20 years, and we had invited him, 3 or 4 years ago, 5 years ago, to come back and kind of rate us. How have we been doing? And he's like, this is great. You've got your 50% open space, but you're doing it wrong. And he kind of explained the 4-step process of you find your open space first, and then you start plotting out your house sites, then you draw the lot lines, and then the road network. So you're really instead of like clustering it all to maybe Weddington has like larger road buffers, so they were pushing everything into the back and clustering it, and that might be not the area you want to really save. So they're like, you've got the concept, but you're Xeroxing in a conventional and just clustering in. You need to be designing around the open space. So he has this whole 4-step process that'll give us the tools to kind of have a say, have a site walk and some kind of a charrette. So we're really into some more of the design of these subdivisions.
The one in Weddington, Stratford Hall, Randall actually worked on. So that one was done correctly.
That one was done
That's
correctly.
something that we should maybe
Yeah.
I agree, but I know we have to be careful too with essentially state law and what purviews we can put over HOAs. I know that there's some but it's kind of the same with any community that has an HOA. Even a larger community with an HOA, if an HOA is not properly run, that any HOA can go defunct, and then it would result back into essentially the community essentially individual rights who would have to decide. The individual residential owners would have to decide how best to proceed from there. And so that I think is the best small government option we have is actually not to dive in too far into having restrictive oversight into an HOA, but be mindful, and that's why I recommended the 501c3. Be mindful of the intent of the land, and that land is to be preserved in perpetuity, and that 501c3 would be an added barrier protecting essentially the intended purposes. And it's not a bad idea. That's not.
There's nothing serving land. There's nothing.
Well, unless you say.
Hey guys, I got a note that they can't hear us online, so make sure you're speaking into the mic.
Thank you.
No, the only thing I'm saying is, I don't know if it is or not. I mean, the question is, do you really want in downtown Waxhaw to have areas that are just wild? I mean, that's the question you have. Or do you want the area maintained kind of like a pasture lane?
And that goes back into setting what our priorities are. Where do we want to see? Do you want pasture land preserved? Because my personal opinion, Waxhaw has less and less pasture land open compared to our forested areas. And now we get to go back into shaping, where do we want to see this development possibly occur? Do we want to see preservation of pasture land? I would lean personally, in my opinion, I think pasture land and preserving some of that goes back into preserving our roots of Waxhaw and what it is.
No, what I'm talking about pasture land, usually pasture land, you mow it, you put it to mow it sometimes for hay. What I'm saying, which I'm hearing Trey say, you may not mow it. It may be 10-foot high grass and all that kind of stuff. I guess if that's what you're looking at. That's all I'm saying.
Not to figure out tonight, but that's all the stuff we can look
we
at.
talk about, but
Yep.
that's a risk nowadays.
But definitely something to consider. I'll give it an example that's currently within our purview, essentially as a municipality. We've been maintaining 34 acres on Waxhaw Marvin Road, and what was that mowing bill there? Then we made an adjustment and mowed essentially to meet our standards instead of mowing the whole thing. We mowed to meet our standards of that, I believe, 20 foot from the road right away. But then there are other opportunities too, and I'm just throwing this out there. How many areas might want to bring in sheep, goats to graze down a grass area, and then now you have bringing back essentially a small farm agricultural aspect to our town and municipality, and it could be done on a temporary lease contract or something like that with the HOA originally, but the town is always a backup on that land.
Goat subsidies.
That's all I had. Thank you guys.
Does anybody else have anything? Moving down here, thank you, Lisa, for recapping our conservation subdivision, and looking forward to seeing that distribution of essentially the workshop. I believe we now move on to item F. We have a petition for RZ 015255 2024, and I believe Janet is our presenter this evening on this rezoning petition.
Yes, good evening, everyone. So this rezoning petition is for the Fox parcel on Waxhaw Marvin Road. It's a request by the applicant Wesley Fox for a rezoning map amendment for the parcel from R4 residential to CC commercial corridor. The property is approximately 1.5 acres located on Waxhaw Marvin Road, adjacent to the Waxhaw Equipment Company. The map on the screen shows the parcel outlined in red, and you can see here is Waxhaw Marvin Road. The railroad tracks are down here, And this is the Waxhaw equipment rental and the town's rec barn. The parcel is vacant property, currently zoned R4 residential. Adjacent properties to the north are a single-family home zoned neighborhood center and an approved single-family project zoned R4. And then to the east are parcels owned by Mr. Fox, zoned commercial corridor and home to Waxhaw equipment rental. To the south, on the other side of the railroad tracks, is a vacant parcel currently Union County R40, and to the west are vacant parcels zoned Waxhaw R4. State law mandates that zoning be undertaken with consideration of a comprehensive plan and that a consistency statement be prepared and approved for every zoning amendment. The recently adopted Waxhaw 2040 future land use map designates the property as employment center. Employment center zoning allows for the development of larger scale businesses to drive employment and economic opportunities, including a variety of industries and uses that have limited impact on surrounding areas, such as office parks, light or high-tech industrial campuses, and warehousing or distribution facilities. EC is intended to provide for high-quality jobs that have managed impacts in areas that are well connected to current and future regional transportation routes. The proposed zoning is CC, Commercial Corridor. Commercial Corridor zoning provides for service and retail uses to meet daily needs of local residents in a manner conveniently accessible by automobile while maintaining efficient vehicular and pedestrian access management. Corridor Commercial allows for growth consistent with the existing development, primarily located along Highway 16 corridor. It encourages infill development that is designed to be complementary of the historic downtown architecture and increase the walkability and access to surrounding residential neighborhoods. So I prepared a consistency and reasonableness statement. The request is inconsistent with the Waxhaw 2040 future land use map, but it is reasonable and in the public interest as the parcel is adjacent to other commercial corridor zoned properties and will provide diversity to the tax base. The requested action this evening is a motion for a favorable recommendation for the petition and the reasonableness and consistency statement as presented. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Janet. I'd like to go ahead and open it up here to any questions. I had one question, and I know this isn't quite within the purview of the rezoning, but I wanted to inquire, for the new property, are they going to be seeking a driveway cut through NCDOT, or is that through the town?
Is that NCDOT, right? Yeah. It would be through NCDOT if they choose to do that.
Okay. Reason why I was just asking is, being a patron of the established business already there, I just noticed that the driveway cut in the way that it is currently situated is awkward, to say the least. And I was just curious on who has purview, if the town had purview, or if it was NCDOT on an additional driveway cut.
Yeah, it's an NCDOT road.
Okay, perfect.
And that property is owned by the same person that owns Waxhaw Rental. So.
Yes, I was just curious on if we had essentially purview or if NCDOT did. I wanted to clarify.
Okay. Yes.
All right. Being no other questions, can I get a motion, please?
I make a motion for a favorable recommendation for petition RZ015222, 015255-2024, and the reasonableness and consistency statement as presented.
I'll second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving down, we just have a work session. Is there any more topics that we wanted to cover here? All right, can I get a motion to adjourn, please?
Motion to adjourn?
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Well, just trying to be, I just don't